Welcome back to On the Line. I am your host, Samira Moyedin, and I'm wearing a blazer. I have been working my way through Omar El-Akkad's book, One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This. And this week, Israel celebrated what it calls Independence Day. And I wanted to read you an excerpt that has really gripped me over the past couple days. I watch footage of people bringing their kids to a party of sorts, only it's not a party, it's a blockade. The people are here to stop aid trucks from entering Gaza, but the atmosphere is festive. Someone on the other side of these walls is going to starve to death or be operated on without proper medical equipment, because this aid won't pass. But there is something festive here. 10 years earlier, when I watched footage of settlers with folding chairs up on the hillside, viewing the bombing of Gaza as one would view a summer blockbuster, again, there is a celebratory air. I am reminded of what the actor Helen Mirren said of her time in Israel in 1967. Quote, "I saw Arabs being thrown out of their houses in Jerusalem, but it was just the extraordinary magical energy of a country just beginning to put its roots in the ground. It was an amazing time to be here." British actor Helen Mirren. If you haven't gotten your hands on this book, get it. You won't regret it. My guest today for On the Line is the former PLO negotiator and legal scholar Diana Buttu. She lives in Haifa, and this is the third time that I'm speaking with Diana since Israel began its maniacal genocide in Gaza. What's really interesting about this time that I spoke with Diana is that she gives me a gripping detail of what it feels like to live among a population in the grips of genocidal fervor. As always, we ask that you support the work we do. We cannot do this work without you. We are bringing you the voices of the people you most need to hear from now. Please visit patreon.com/onthelinemedia. Coming up is my conversation with the amazing Diana Buttu. Stay tuned. Diana Buttu, thank you again for joining me. The last time we spoke, I think, was October 2024. It was about 8 months ago. And even as I say that, you know, it's a bit jarring because I feel like 80 years has gone by since I spoke with you.
Yes.
I want to start with time. Like, how has your relationship to time changed in this past year, really?
You know, Samina, it's not even just time, it's everything. I think we're walking, but dead. So our bodies are alive. The hearts are pumping. The brain's still functioning. We still have our faculties, but we're essentially dead. And so time doesn't have any meaning any longer. So much so that when I talk to friends, we're measuring time based on what major massacre happened. And then having to go back and say, oh, that happened in this month, or that happened in that month, or that happened at this point in time. And so everything else becomes like just useless details, right? So, and the fact that that Israel's been able to carry out genocide now for 19 months. Yeah, that's like a year and 7 months. And there's no end in sight and nobody's doing anything about it. Like you feel like I feel I'm living through what my father used to describe as what happened to him during the Nakba, during the 1948, particularly 47 through 49. Yeah.
This week, Israel's cabinet approved the full occupation of Gaza and the total
Yeah.
ethnic cleansing of the North. What were your thoughts
Yeah.
when you saw that news come out?
I'm not surprised. Look, I think there's a few things. First is, let's be clear in saying that it's always been an occupation. And when the Israelis say they're now approving occupation, what they're meaning to say is that they're approving the troops on the ground. They've spent since 2005 so much time trying to pretend that there's no occupation because there were no quote unquote boots on the ground. They maintained control, they maintained a brutal siege, etc. But they were always splitting these fine hairs of saying there's no real occupation because there's no boots on the ground, whereas we know that it was occupation. What they're now talking about is all of that control plus plus. So what they're now talking about is building and expanding settlements in Gaza, bringing in Israeli settlers to live in the area, and to do exactly what Netanyahu said at the beginning. I think I think many people were just glossing over what Netanyahu was saying at the beginning, but I was actually paying particular attention to it because I wanted to see whether he had a quote unquote plan. And all that we instead saw was all this cheerleading on the part of the West of go for it. Yes, you get to avenge. Yes, you get to do whatever you want. But in the process, one of the things he said early on was the Gaza Strip is going to be smaller in size and thinner in population. All that it's taken now is a year and 7 months, so 19 months, to get him to the point where he's very obvious about it, where he's saying it's going to be thinner in size, smaller in size and thinner in population. Or it's already thinner because we've seen that they've brutally killed over 60,000 people. That's the 52,000 that we know of, and then the more than 11,000 that are under the rubble, plus the tens of thousands who've died because of inadequate medical attention, like not directly the result of Israeli bombs, but the result of inadequate medical care, for example. So we're already seeing that the population, yeah, or people who've left, like we've already seen that it's thinner in population. And the smaller in size is the Israelis have been dropping these orders, these evacuation orders all over Gaza and treating Palestinians in Gaza as though they're human pinballs, bouncing them from one area to the next, to the next, to the next. And in the process, we now see that between 60 to 70% of the Gaza Strip, which was already packed, is now off limits to people in Gaza. And that these are death zones, including the ones that are so-called safe zones. They're death zones as well. But these are the straight up, as announced, death zones. So when the cabinet came out and said this, my reaction was, well, haven't you been saying it all along? I mean, haven't you been doing this all along? And why is it that it has taken this one statement for the world to wake up and to see and to believe what he's been saying all along? Samira, one of the things that you and I have talked about this many a time, one of the things that is so alarming for me as a Palestinian is just not only the level of dehumanization, which you and I have spoken about, but the fact that nobody ever believes us. That when we say, listen to what the Israelis are saying and believe them, we're told as though we're somehow stupid, or that we don't understand, or we don't understand internal Israeli politics, or he's just saying it to appease a crowd, or whatever. But the reality is that whatever Netanyahu says, he actually does. What the right wing says, he's part of the right wing, but what the fascist right is saying, and he's part of that fascist right, whatever they say, they do, they implement. And so I feel like we're still in this world where people don't believe Palestinians and somehow will give the Israelis a pass time and again and again and again. And like, why is this? Why is it that when the Israeli prime minister is speaking very openly about what he wants to do, and he said it back in November of 2023, why is it that we're now believing it 19 months into genocide, and we didn't believe it 1 month in when all of this could have been stopped?
Yeah, I want to come to that disbelief because, it's usually around the coverage of this, where journalists sort of lose their faculties. They don't know how to do their job all of a sudden.
Yeah.
That's a bit lower down. And I want to ask you about this hamster wheel that you talk about, and we've spoken about before, because I came across this footage of Chaim Herzog, who was the UN ambassador to Israel in 1976. And he
Yeah.
was holding up what looked like these prefabricated constructed homes. And Israel wanted to move Palestinians in Gaza into these homes, into the south, like push them into the Sinai. And he was chastising the United Nations General Assembly for not allowing Israel to do this. And I wanted to ask you about this history. Like, what is it that people don't quite understand? How Palestinians are almost locked in this constant regurgitation of Israel's desires to depopulate the entirety of Gaza. Why is it that people don't understand this hamster wheel?
I wish I knew. I wish I knew. This is I genuinely wish I knew. I think is that people don't want to believe that people who emerged from the Holocaust
Mm.
are capable of committing massive war crimes. I think that that is part of it, is this idea that somehow because they went and lived through and survived mass atrocities, that there's no way that they can turn around and do this to somebody else. But the fact of the matter is that we've seen this time and again. And so I think that the Israelis often get a pass, in part because there's this sense that, oh no, on the one hand, they're saying one thing, but then they do another.
Mm.
But also because people genuinely inside don't want to believe that this is what Israel's about. But it is what Israel's about. I mean, when I look around, living as I do in Haifa, I travel around a lot. I travel to the place where my father is from Limjedel, an ethnically cleansed town, to Nazareth, to various cities and towns throughout the entire country. And you see the ruins of Palestinian homes. And sometimes you see not the ruins, you see the actual home and an Israeli living inside of it. The only way that you can do that is through a massive dehumanization process. That's it. That's the only thing that can be done. Is the only way you can destroy so many villages is by dehumanizing. The only way you can live in a Palestinian house that isn't yours, obviously, is through dehumanization. And so people are unwilling to believe the lengths to which the Israelis go to dehumanize, so much so that they view that it's kind of an aberration if they're holding up these little pictures of the temporary housing and saying, yes, go to Sinai. But that's what the Zionist project is about. It's about getting rid of Palestinians and taking their land. That's what it's always been about. That's what it will forever be about. And that's why there is no such thing as liberal Zionism.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as soft Zionism. It's just Zionism. We felt it. We've lived it on our bodies. We felt it. And so when people are trying to provide excuses for, as you put it, the hamster wheel, it's exactly just that. It's just providing excuses, but because they fundamentally do not want to believe what Palestinians go through, and they fundamentally do not want to recognize the evil that Zionism is.
And you touched a little bit on the destroying of these villages. And I came across yesterday, I was going through the CBC's archives, and I came across this amazing documentary from the Fifth Estate. This is their like current affairs program.
I remember this.
And it was from 1991. And
I know the program.
Yeah, and it was about Canada Park.
Park, yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Right now, I think 70% of it was burned. And again, that JNF reforestation of this area, trying to cover these 3 villages. And I just thought to myself, you would never see that program today. I mean, what has happened to coverage to make it in this sort of, as we talked about, disbelief that Israel could be guilty of such crimes? It seems to me that the coverage has gotten worse? Like, what have you noticed in the past decades or so?
I've noticed two things. So on the one hand, it's gotten worse. On the other hand, it's gotten better. And let me break that down.
Yeah.
So on let's talk about the better first. There is a lot of non-corporate independent media that has emerged over the course of the past couple of decades. And these sources are there, you're one of them, that's out there that can and will provide the truth about what's happening without this method of interrogation, which was very popular in the early 2000s of having just bringing on two people on TV and having them duke it out on the screen, and it was more entertainment than it was actual news. So there's been the rise of independent media and citizen media, right, where people are able to upload, very sadly, the images of their own genocide. And so we've seen on that level, it's gotten better. On another level, though, it's just gotten that much worse. And the reasons why, I think, are pretty deep. One is, I think that that the Israelis have spent a lot of time and a lot of effort on what they call Hasbara, which is their propaganda outfit, of trying to explain to corporate media. The second is that we've in general seen a dumbing down of news media. So that piece, I remember that segment so well, was quite a number of minutes. You won't see anything
It
like
was
that
two
on
episodes. It
TV.
was two episodes, yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And you won't see anything like that any longer. It's been shortened, it's been kind of dumbed down. And so it's all about getting in the quick talking point. But the third reason is, I think that in the haste to compete, what's missing is context. And if you're always in a place where you're just cutting short on context, then you're never really giving the reader or the viewer, the listener, what's actually happening. And that's what I've seen happen over the course of the past few years, is that segments are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. They're more about what the essence is. You can't fully explain the Palestinian experience. And there's always this attempt to both sides everything. I remember during the period of apartheid South Africa, before the regime fell, that you would never see a both sides on the nightly news. You would never have both sides explaining on the nightly news. And yet here we are in a place where this is worse than apartheid. We actually have genocide, and Israelis are perpetrating genocide, and we're still in a place where we're expected to both sides everything. Oh, let's hear from an Israeli spokesperson.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, let's hear from a Palestinian. When we talk to the Palestinian, they have to talk all sorts of things about Hamas and about a government that they've not elected, nor are they part of. And yet for the Israeli spokespeople, they get the softball. You'll never hear an Israeli citizen be asked about the occupation or about the Nakba or about the genocide. You'll just hear them in their small little world, but somehow each and every Palestinian is expected to be an ambassador, a spokesperson, a representative of their government, of their people, of their everything. So it goes both ways. It's been going both ways, at least the way I've seen it.
Yeah, I mean, I have this argument with colleagues all the time because they say, oh, it's getting better, and I feel from what I see that there is a real hardening of, no, we have to do it this way. We have to both sides the issue.
Yeah.
And that's what I've been seeing, unless you're looking at independent or alternative media. Otherwise,
Yes.
there is a real hardening. Yesterday, in the occupied East Jerusalem, Israel raided 3 schools, UNRWA-run schools, shutting them down. And this was based on an order given by Israel's Ministry of Education. What were your thoughts when you saw these schools being raided? And what is the real goal of this?
Okay, so let's step back. So back in October of last year, October of 2024, the Israelis passed 2 pieces of legislation, 2 very short laws, and they're both in relation to UNRWA. the first one says that that anything that has to do with UNRWA that is within, as they put it, Israeli territory, that it has to be shut down. And the second one says that Israeli officials can't at all coordinate or do any sort of have any cooperation whatsoever with UNRWA. And so you have to scratch the surface and ask, well, why? And the reason is clear. They've been wanting to get rid of UNRWA. Israel's been wanting to get rid of UNRWA since UNRWA was established. If there's one thread that you can follow throughout each and every Israeli government, from the establishment of UNRWA until the current day, is their disdain for UNRWA. Why? Because UNRWA is the symbol of the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. It's the symbol of the refugee crisis. It's the very reason it exists is because Palestinians were ethnically cleansed from their homes in 1948. And so what the Israelis are always trying to do is shut it down in this attempt to somehow get rid of the refugee issue, with the theory being that if we just close the door, if we just, get rid of them, then there won't be a problem. Nobody will talk about Palestinian refugees. There won't be an issue. And of course, there's going to still be an issue. And of course, even if UNRWA were to fold tomorrow, Palestinians are still refugees and they still have rights and they still have the right to return. But in Israel's mind, it's that if they just cut it off, they don't have to think about it, they don't have to see it, and they can ignore it and pretend that the issue doesn't exist. So the Israelis have been going after UNRWA for as long as I've been alive, and even longer, because that's what they want. And then finally, in 2024, of October 2024, is when they finally decided that they were going to deal it the final blow. And so they did. They forced UNRWA staff, their international staff, out at the end of January. They announced that that they were taking over their premises. And what they've since done is they've cut off all coordination, which means that if you think about it in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip, in Gaza, it's deadly. Because UNRWA was the primary body, or one of the primary bodies, that was aiding in food distribution. When you cut off all coordination with UNRWA, how are you going to bring in food supplies? In the West Bank, the cutting off of coordination and any cooperation also means everything from attacking schools, to making sure that people's salaries can't be paid because money can't come in from outside to pay the salaries. It means everything from not being able to get books. Remember, all of our borders are controlled by the Israelis.
Right.
And so their attempt to shut it down is effectively a way of strangling the West Bank schools and primarily hospitals. A lot of people get their healthcare services from UNRWA. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole point, is that they want to strangle it. Was I surprised? No, because nothing surprises me these days. What surprises me is that still Palestinians have to keep screaming about this, and that there's still nobody who's coming forward and saying, hey, this is a UN agency. Israel is the only country that has barred UN agencies from working in its midst. Not only that, they've declared people persona non grata. Like, what more needs to happen for the member states of the UN to wake up and say, yo, there's one country that's a rogue state, and that's Israel. But instead, they keep trying to coddle it, and they keep issuing these statements of how alarmed they are and how dangerous escalation it is, but then, effectively doing nothing. And if there's one truth, it's that the UN is only as powerful as its member states. The UN on its own can't do anything. And so if the member states are not willing to back their own agencies, then it leads one to question the utility of the UN to begin with.
I kept thinking about I've even said it, that there needs to be some sort of international protective force going into Gaza. And should have happened at least a year ago. And it just feels like you really see the impotency of all of these institutions that we always thought were created to stop such a thing. And it's a very icky feeling
Yeah.
to see all of this, crumbling down. I mean, it's not only that the world has allowed Israel, and I shouldn't say the world because many of these states are totally against what Israel is doing, but it's really the US, Germany, France, etc., Canada, have really allowed this to happen. And then not even just allowed Palestinians to be killed in this way, but they've allowed the killing of all of these quote unquote norms of international law, international human rights law. And then at the same time, I am of this other mind that everything, we shouldn't have even believed these things were set up to help people in Palestine to begin with. I mean, it shows how these laws, I don't know, it's a very jarring, you really feel like you're walking through the world, as you said, walking dead. My brain is rotting as every hour with every single massacre that goes by. And I've been really grappling with this issue a lot of why people lie for Israel, because over the past year and a half, we hear a lot about the Palestine exception, but I feel like we need to talk about the Israeli exception, and
It
how they're
is.
just allowed to run roughshod over the entire world. Diana, I just came back from Dubai. I had to go there to see family, and it was for my aunt's 80th. There were so many Israeli IDF soldiers vacationing there, and it was so unsettling to see. And I'm just wondering, you're in Haifa.
Yeah.
How is it for you to be in this environment right now?
I don't even know if there's any words any longer. Um, because because all day long you look around and you just see these symbols of genocide, of ethnic cleansing, of occupation, and it's just all over the place. So, for example, the other day, there was a delivery, like a little, somebody was delivering something to my neighbor's house. And at the back of the little, it's like a Vespa. Um, Otherwise, left wing Israeli, looks like a hippie, he's fully tattooed, listening to some cool music. And on the back of the Vespa, there was a sign that says, Occupy Gaza now. A la the way that I just described it earlier, which is, build settlements.
Yeah.
And isn't that something that, like, it didn't fit, right? It doesn't fit, because usually when you think about these people who are the fascist right wing, you're thinking about the religious right. And this guy was far from. So you see things like that. Then you see signs all over the place that say, together we will succeed. And without anybody ever questioning what success looks like, like, they never interrogate what does that actually mean? Then if the casual conversation with people, if you talk about Gaza, they'll either say, oh, I don't want to talk about it, or it's always Palestinians' fault. So we are to blame for our own starvation. Okay, we're to blame. We're to blame for our own genocide. Like, who thinks that way? We're to blame for the flattening of Gaza. So it's the way that an abuser would speak to his partner. And that's what you're living with all
You
the
made
time.
me do it. Yeah,
Exactly. You made me do it. And if only you had not heated the coffee so much, or if only the eggs had been cooked a little bit better, or if only the kids, their hair had been a little bit nicer, then I wouldn't be forced to do what I'm doing to you. And this is the mentality. And so you see all sorts of, like, you just see people all over the place. So first of all, you see a lot of soldiers, but then you also see even the non-soldiers, people who are very supportive of this genocide, or who don't want to talk about it, who just pretend as though it's in some other country, which even if it's in another country, you should be talking about it, right? But just want to pretend as though it's in some other place. And then when, for me, as somebody who walks around, and, you know, I told you that I'm like kind of deeply feeling that when I see stones and I see villages, and I go back to my father's village, I feel like I see ghosts all the time. I really genuinely do. Like, I feel that there's just the ghosts of the people who belong in the land are there. And so it's very off-putting. It's very off-putting. And yet you have to understand what it's like to be a Palestinian living in 48, like inside Israel, from 1948 until the current day. And this is a people. I wasn't raised in Israel. I was raised in Canada. But the people. So I say this because I don't want to overstep my boundary in terms of speaking about this community, and at the same time, I feel like I have some observations because of the fact that I was born and raised in Canada. And so one of the things that I see a lot is that this is a community that has spent its entire existence in self-preservation mode, thinking that at any moment they can be next. And on another level, knowing that they will be next. So you live as a person who is always looking over your shoulder, who's always really careful about what you say, what you do, how you dress, whether you quote unquote pass. It's exhausting. It's genuinely exhausting. And in that's all about self-preservation. That's all about how am I going to survive? How am I going to survive living in this space? It's truly exhausting. And then in the process, you see all of these people who are genuinely genocidal. You know, you see the people who are genocidal. So it's just so jarring to live with 24/7. And yeah, that's yeah.
You mentioned Canada, and we just elected a new prime minister.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, I mean, you're in Haifa, but were you following any of this? What are your thoughts as you see, what's your report card, I guess, on Canada over the past 18 months?
I think the report card's much longer than that, right? So I look at Canada from the time that I first moved here, and then gauge it based on that. And what I noticed was that the moment from 2006, the moment that, and it was a Harper government at the time, for those who don't remember, the moment that Palestinians had their general elections, which I can't vote in because I'm not a West Bank or Gaza resident citizen. So when those elections happened in 2006, and Hamas was elected, they won the popular vote. I'm sure you recall this, but it was Canada that took the first decision to cut ties with the Palestinians. It wasn't the Americans. It was Canada, and the report card has gone downhill ever since. I think that people were expecting that there was going to be a reset when Trudeau was elected, because of the legacy of his father, because this was no longer a conservative government, and so on. And yet all that I saw throughout the Trudeau years was exactly continuation of the years of the governments before him. There was no substantive difference. I think I was expecting to see some sort of shift, some change, whether in the UN or speech-wise or otherwise. And it largely remained in lockstep with the United States, even during the Trump years, when there was the ability to step away and say, we're not like this guy. They stayed in lockstep. Now, leading up to the past 18 months, we've seen that Trudeau also didn't take any really courageous steps when it came to genocide. It was the same. It was the same policies as the U.S., the same statements. There were some milder statements. He was a little bit quicker to come out and talk about some Israeli actions, but that's it. There's been nothing really huge or substantive when it comes to the government. And, time will tell whether this new prime minister is going to do something about it, whether there's going to be a shift in his policies, or whether he's going to continue along the same path as the previous Trudeau governments, which were in line with the other governments as well. So it really remains to be seen. Are there things that Canada can do? Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the things, Samira, that you and I've talked about in the past, and you raised it just a moment ago when it came to the issue of international law, is that on international law, I refuse to concede in that territory. I'm not going to give it to the Israelis. I refuse. Okay, we've conceded so much. I'm not going to concede on this area. And international law is firm. It's firm that hospitals are not targets. It's firm that journalists are not targets. It's firm that civilians are not targets. And it's firm that healthcare workers and paramedics and all of the people that Israel has been targeting, international law is firm on them, and there is no deviating from it. So I think that and Canada has always taken the position that it believes and supports international law. And I'll talk in a second about their submission to the ICJ, on the ICJ case that came out last year. I'll talk about that in a second. But they've always been firm in their position on international law. And international law, I refuse to concede, and I refuse to cede territory on it. It's clear when it comes to what are considered to be legitimate versus illegitimate targets. And what Canada can and should be doing is standing up and saying, hospitals are not targets. Paramedics, as we saw that they not only attacked the paramedics, but they buried their ambulance.
Yeah.
They tried to cover it up. Those are not targets. The 200 and close to 220 Palestinian journalists that the Israelis have killed are not targets. They're not legitimate targets. The humanitarian workers that they've gone after, such as the World Central Kitchen and other places, the UN workers, all of these things that are areas that Canada should be standing up to and should be saying very loudly that A, they're not targets, and B, that Israel is going to be held to account for them.
Mm.
What's happened instead is that because the mainstream media has taken this path of, oh, he said, she said, the Israelis said, the Palestinians said, there's somehow no reference point. And if anything, the world has taught us is that there are reference points when it comes to these types of actions, that we can't just turn around and say, yes, because the coffee wasn't hot enough, they get to target the hospital. Because the eggs weren't cooked well enough, they get to mow down the paramedics. Because of this, these are not standards. And Canada has been a country that has said that it believes in international law. And if it does, this is the bare minimum that they should be standing up for and saying these are not targets, and Israel is going to be held to account. And any ties that we have with Israel, because it's doing these actions, are going to be cut. This is all entirely possible. The question is whether they want to do it. And what my fear is that Canada is always looking for a quote unquote coalition of the willing. And their coalition of the willing centers around the United States, which right now is, we've got a president that thinks that Canada's for sale, right? So, I mean, this is the time is now, and there is a space and place for Canada to step out and do what it should be doing. But the question remains, will it? And I wanted to bring this back to the 2024 ICJ decision.
Yes.
So in that decision, this was an advisory opinion that came out in July of 2024, and in that decision, the World Court, and it's these outcomes are binding. In other words, like this is law. This not just because it's an advisory opinion doesn't mean that it's not law. They're just asking a question, and the outcome is law. And in the outcome, the court says that Israel has to pull out of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And it says the occupation is illegal, not only because of its duration, but because of the way that they've acted. Mm-hmm. The whole thing is illegal. And this binds Canada as well. Now, in their 2024 submission, Canada was made a submission to the court for that case. Canada took this totally silly and stupid view that oh, yes, this is all well and good. International law is important, but we actually believe that disputes can only be decided by the parties. Let's go back to the domestic abuse scenario. Really, really, that's what we want to do. Really, that's what we want to do. And what's amazing is that the court shot that down. The court totally went after that and said, "This is dumb. What a dumb argument." And so, if anything, the time is now for Canada to step away from this whole idea of the coalition of the willing, step away from this idea that the abused must negotiate with their abuser, and instead take the position that there are international laws and there are international standards, and that it's Canada's role to make sure that this is implemented and upheld.
That wasn't covered at all.
I know. Of course there wasn't.
None of not the submission, not the rejection, none of that was covered in our media here. Not one bit of it.
Yeah.
We would never do this with any other country or any other issue.
Of course not. Can you imagine Canada submitting to the ICJ on an issue, let's say, of Ukraine, Russia, and Canada saying, we really just think that, it's like, can't we all just get along?
Or Myanmar.
How about we just, or Myanmar, yeah.
Very direct approach with Myanmar.
Absolutely.
Aubrey was heavily involved, even visiting.
Absolutely.
It's. Anyways, I don't want to swear. Recently, just to go back to Canada, the Maple, this is an independent Canadian media outlet, did this huge investigative report and a dump on the Canadian soldiers serving in the IDF. And I'm just wondering if you see, because it is illegal under our own domestic law.
Absolutely.
If you see any not hope, but any mechanisms whereby these soldiers can be held to account.
Yeah, there are. Of course, there are mechanisms. And again, the question becomes whether they're going to do it or whether they're not going to do it. And you put it perfectly when you said this is the Israel exception. And it is the Israel exception that on every level, there's an exception that is given. There's a pass that's given to Israel to do whatever it is it wants to do. I mean, so much so that, I've been looking at these, especially in the United States, less in Canada, but the ways in which we see these protests happening all on campus, and how, and there are protests, as you pointed out, on Canadian campuses as well, how all of this becomes shut down because of the Israel exception. That under the guise of making students feel quote unquote safe, that you can't even speak out against genocide, that somehow speaking out against genocide, speaking out against ethnic cleansing, speaking out against starvation, that those things somehow make people feel unsafe. I mean, I don't get it. I don't get it. And in any other context, it would be that we'd be applauding these students for doing what they're doing, because they are serving as the moral compass in a time when there are no compasses any longer. And so, yes, there are mechanisms, but the real question becomes whether that Israel exception is going to be kicked in, or whether somebody's going to say, hey, that going to the Israeli army is not cool. By the way, I never use the term serve, because serve means that they're actually doing something for me. The only thing that they're serving up is genocide.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's interesting. I was thinking about UBC. This is University of British Columbia. And when there was all this talk about the genocide of the Uyghurs in China. And all these students were protesting on the campus at UBC. And Chinese students at one point started taking down these posters and things. And the way the university came down on those Chinese students is just unfathomable if you even think that those would have been Jewish students. There was no talk of, do Chinese students feel safe on
Yeah.
campus.
Yeah.
And just the sheer level of the Janus-faced hypocrisy that I think has
Yeah.
been stripped during these past 18 months is something, again, that I think people don't know how to navigate. And I'm just wondering at this point, and this is my last question for you, what is your biggest fear going forward?
Oh, my fear going forward is that all of this has been normalized,
Mm.
and that how do I put this? And I hear this a lot here where I live. Unless the number reaches 6 million,
Oh, wow.
then it's not genocide. Yeah. And that is terrifying. So when I hear Israeli spokespeople justify starvation, when I hear and see the trolls online saying, how can it be genocide when only X number of people have been killed?
Mm-hmm. Or look how
When
fast.
I look how, yes, exactly. When I see when you look at images of Gaza now, and of course, remember, we've not been allowed in. I don't know if I'll ever be allowed in. Foreign journalists are not allowed in. But just taking a look at the satellite imagery and seeing what's happened to Gaza, we go back to the same refrain over and over again of, you made us do it. You made us do it. And there'll be like a guilt that comes out for us making them do it. That'll be because there's the whole idea of the victim. But my fear is that unless it's it's become so routine and so commonplace to carry out these war crimes that unless there's a totally like stark number, which there never will be, then it can never rise to what the Israelis view in their minds is genocide, and what the world views as genocide. And again, by the world, we're talking about the Western world, and that's very frightening. I know you remember this, but I'm just going to, for maybe the people who are listening who may not. On the 17th of October of 2023, Israel bombed the Al Ma'madani, the Baptist hospital in Gaza. And at the time, there's all this hand wringing. Oh, who did it? Who did it? Was it the Palestinians? And Human Rights Watch came out with a stupid report as well. And none of them were there, by the way. And this went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then I think it was November 7th. I'm pretty sure it was November 7th. The Israelis took over Shifa Hospital.
And we
Okay.
saw that ridiculous rendering of a.
Remember the rendering? Yes. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So here we are 19 months later, and all 36 hospitals later, each and every one of them has been attacked. Why? Because that became normalized. Because the attacks on hospitals became normalized. Look, for example, at my friend. It's going to be the anniversary of her killing in a couple of days. Shireen Abu Akleh. She was killed on May the 11th of 2022. And I remember I wrote a piece for the New York Times that said, Israel killed Shireen Abu Akleh, who's going to be next?
Mm-hmm.
And because they got away with it, literally got away with it, we're now looking at over 200. And I don't even have the accurate number. That's how bad it is.
Have it, yeah. It just two more
over 220 Palestinian journalists killed. We know who's next. We know that they normalized that. Let's look at the World Central Kitchen. They killed the people that were in World Central Kitchen. Uproar for a few days. Oops, sorry, we made a mistake. And because nobody was held to account, they went after more humanitarian workers. There's been over 250 UN workers killed. And just 3 weeks ago, the Israelis attacked a couple of ambulances, killing 14 paramedics. And not only did they kill the paramedics, they dug the ground and buried the ambulance with the dead bodies inside it. And these people were found shackled, their hands, hands tied, right? Hands and legs tied. And the whole time the Israelis kept saying, oh, it's Hamas, Hamas, Hamas. It was only when we found the footage, video and audio, that the Israelis were put on the defensive. Does that mean that they're going to stop? Absolutely not, because so what, they're put on the defensive. This is their tactic, is deny, deflect, oops, sorry, repeat. And we'll do again. And so my fear is that all of this has been normalized. All of it has been normalized. And unless it hits this magic number where every single person in Gaza, with maybe exception of 5, are allowed to survive, then it's not considered, in the eyes of at least the Israelis, genocide. That's terrifying. And if it's not considered genocide in their eyes, you know that it's not considered genocide in the eyes of the Western powers either.
I think we'll leave it there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.